presidential oration is sponsored by NACE-LAB. Here we have our Honorable Chairpersons Dr. Sanatan Rath and Dr. Narayan Upadhyay.
Respected Dr. Sanatan Rath, who has been regarded as the father of neurosurgery of Odisha. He was the ex-HOD of Department of Neurosurgery of SCV Medical College, Cuttack, from the year 1970 to 1992, and presently in his 80s, he is still actively serving in the field of neurosurgery.
And Dr. Narayan Upadhyay is the founder, professor and HOD of the Department of Neurology at Assam Medical College, Dibrugarh. And he is also trained as WHO Fellow in Queen's Square, London. Now I request Dr. Prakash Chandra sir to introduce our President of ANI, Professor Dr. Gauri Kumar Prusti.
Will you go to my book which I gave your wife? Do you like it?
Let there be some light, please.
Let there be some light, please. That's a very significant
I have known
phrase.
Gauri Kumar Prusti ever since he landed in Nimhams in 1980, and he landed directly into my room because he was not allotted his separate room. He stayed there for a few days before he settled into his room. He joined Nimhams as a non-PG resident, and I am a witness to his evolution during his residency and even afterwards, because we have been in constant touch with each other. Even if I speak only a few words, it will be a long story. To cut it short, I'll read from a brief outline provided to me. Can I have some light? Prusti hails from Odisha. He graduated from Kurla Medical College, then went to CMC Vellore. From there he joined Nimhams, finished his residency, proceeded to Sri Chitra Trinal Institute at Trivandrum as faculty, and then he did cerebrovascular fellowship in Japan and UK and a spine fellowship in Germany. His research interests fall in the cerebrovascular and brain trauma spheres, and he has published on both. He has been a book editor for the Journal of Neurotrauma. He has been a Cambridge author and contributed chapters in the book Traumatic Brain and Spinal Injury. He has been a compiler of the Indian guidelines for head and spinal injury. Dr. Prusti has been a member of our association since beginning. He has served as the executive member of ANI. Currently, He is the executive body member of the International Neurotrauma Society. He is vice president of the West Bengal Spinal Cord Society. He served as the president of Neurotrauma Society of India in 2008-2009. He was executive member of the Indian Society for Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery. He is perhaps the only any president who has served in Bihar, Odisha and West Bengal. Many of you might be interested in knowing that he has established and founded the Department of Neurosurgery at Bokaro General Hospital. In international perspective, Dr. Pusti is an accidentologist. He addressed seriously the extraordinary burden of road trauma to international society in 2009 at San Diego, USA. In clinical sphere, his research has centered on intracranial pressure monitoring and conservative management of head injury. It's nostalgic to note for me that the Resident Doctors Association of NIMHANS was started at his initiative. Great personalities like former Premier of France, Mr. Michael Ricard, and Mother Teresa were under his care, who called him the king of medical miracles. Dr. Pusti has not only graduated in medicine, surgery, and has masters in neurosurgery, he is also a graduate of law. He has many laurels to his credit, many awards, has 14 awards and 67 scientific publications in index journals, has presented 23 scientific papers, and has contributed chapters in important books in neurosurgery. I'd like to present a few slides which will highlight some landmarks in his career and social life. May I have the first slide? Do you have a phone? Good. Here you can see Dr. Pusti in the galaxy of Indian neurosurgeons. Dr. Ramamurthy, Dr. P.N. Tandon, Dr. D. Raut, Dr. S.K. Pandya, Dr. Brahm Prakash. Here, Pusti is seen with Dr. Fujita of Japan and his team. Here he is seen inaugurating the Neurotrauma Society annual conference at Jaipur while he was the president. Here he is seen with the members attending the International Neurotrauma Society in 2009 at San Diego. Is that right? this is interesting. Here we can identify Proust, his wife, his children, and the Prime Minister of France and his family. And here we can see Proust is smiling besides the statue of Mother Teresa with Sisters of Missionaries of Charities. He has a very happy married life, his wife, 2 children, enjoying their company. Before I finally give Dr. Proust to you, I have another important task to perform. May I invite Dr. Proust? There is the presidential medallion.
Om Punnamadaha Punnamidam Punnat Punnamadichyate Punnasya Punnamada Punnavavishyate. Dear friends, dear colleagues, members of the society, my teachers, and Professor Rath and Professor Upadhyay on the dais. Dr. Chandra, your kind introduction has really humbled me. It brings back some emotions in me, so I'll take some time to settle. So thank you for those kind introduction. I'm honored and humbled to deliver this very presidential oration this afternoon. Thank you for this professional honor. I owe a lot to the illustrious predecessors in this position and the various members and the volunteers who served this society to change it to what it is now. It has always been truly inspiring to see the dedication of the members for improving the specialty, and thank you for your efforts. I would also like to thank all the members and guests of ANI for attending this wonderful meeting in this spectacular location. All members of the executive committee deserve special acknowledgement. They worked very hard to make my job easier in assuming this great responsibility. I wish to thank the members of the organizing committee who have put in immense efforts to put this meeting together and make it a success. I believe so. One of the privileges in giving the presidential oration is to pay public homage to those who have been supportive and instrumental in my professional journey. I am profoundly indebted to the institution I belong. These are my sainted parents. I cannot have praise high enough for them. My most enduring acknowledgement, as always, is to my wonderful wife, Mala, who had been my anchor and windward, and provided stability, and our children, Lydia and Vedant, for their support and understanding. I must give my thanks to those, Professor Das and Mrs. Das are in the audience now, my wonderful teachers, whom I was lucky enough to apprentice. Dr. V. Hemlata, Dr. G. N. Narayan Reddy, Dr. Ram, Dr. Verma, and Professor Gauri Devi. I was processed in the Das technology. He was always very kind when kindness is concerned, as kind as a soft flower, but very strong, stronger than thunder, the principles are at stake. I really love and respect them. They demonstrated the humility, the warmth and kindness that cannot be learned by formal study comes from observing the examples of people who manifest those qualities in their own personality. I take this opportunity to acknowledge the legendary Professor Sanatan Dutt for all the encouragement. This well-planned scientific program is replete with learned discussions of great advances with various aspects of neuroscience. Rather than discussing additional clinical aspects and topics, I am going to give you a glimpse of research and future potentials that neuroscience has got. Friends, this is a great time to be a neuroscientist and perhaps the best time in all human history. And as the science progresses in the present period, it may rewrite all the future human history. The past is the key to the present. Looking back stresses the desirability to know what we know and what we might know in order that perspective can be enhanced. No, the longer you look back, the further you look forward. The concept of neuroscience is ancient. Even in the Kundalini Yoga, the highest chakra, that is the consciousness and energy, is of highest frequency, it's just above the head. And in the Bell's theorem, the whole brain, whole universe is contained within the human brain. You can see the brain cell on the left side and the universe picture on the other side. So the whole concept of brain or the mental power, the head is the important structure, has been there in the various mythology and warriors, literature in the past. Here you can see, even in the ancient Bible and other literature, even in Indian literature, people try to protect the head. That indicates that the head has something to do with our power or faculty, whatever you say. Even the Indian mythology, you have got multiple heads, which indicates the mighty of the power that is located in the head. That's not enough. Even in the Ayurveda, we have enough discussion, enough evidence to say that people are doing neuroscience. Jivaka, the physician of Lord Buddha, had to operate on king of Chola, that is Bhoja. Even in the ancient literature that we find in Egypt, there is evidence, and in the Neolithic skull surgery has been done. During the epilepsy program, Sarath was mentioning how it was there, epilepsy treatment in the past. People believed that heart is the center of intelligence, and even Aristotle and Herodotus, these great philosophers, they also believed so. However, it was Hippocrates who first told that the brain is the source of intelligence. However, his belief was not encouraged at that moment. So this was not challenged until when Galen came to picture, and he is the one who again emphasized that the brain is the seat of intelligence, not the heart. Look at this picture. This is the picture which says that painted by Raffaello and Transfiguration. And look at that. Anybody thought about it? Okay. In every art, the artist tries to convey some message. It is hidden there. So it is going to decipher. And this is the creation, Michelangelo's picture. It's creating Adam. Now look at that picture. The drapery behind the god, it's like the sagittal section one can see in the brain. And look at this hand, left hand, what is there? There's a picture in the shoulder of the god. What is doing when he has created Adam? Probably he's thinking of Eve. That is his mind. That's the God's mind. So, if you go by Bell's theorem, there are two particles who are joined together, and you separate these two particles. Take them to the extreme end of the universe. Yet if you change, they are spatially separated. But if you change something in one particle, the other particle changes. How it happens? there is some strange thing, some invisible thing which is connecting these two things. This has been proved both mathematically and in physics. So our brain is basically the most complex structure that you can see in the universe. It is few minutes ago, Sarath was explaining the epilepsy, how the neurons talk to each other. It is, Sherrington has told rightly, it is an enchanted loom of dynamic, ever-changing electrical ripples. You think of the billions of neurons, they are talking their language, and this enchanting ripples that's going in the brain, in 6 billion people living on the earth. So the universe is basically represented within us. In the language of some of the Nobel laureates, your brain, that is Eric Kandel, who got this Nobel Prize on transference, RNA transference, and so also was this, we are just a bunch of neurons. That was Crick's version. This wrinkled brain makes us what we are. If I am to be identified as Dr. Prusti, it's the memory that I have got, which I can express to you, that the memories are the experience of life that is preserved in my memory. That's what makes me what I am. So it's necessary that to know that how this brain has evolved. We're talking about the evolution in every respect. But how and why this brain might have evolved? It's a big question. So we don't have any evidence because fossils don't preserve the brain matter. So we have to calculate it from the existing lives or back calculate how this brain has evolved. The deep history of the brain is, if you trace down the architectural arrangement of the brain, it's an old construction. We have a 1 billion-year-old brain stem with a 500 million-year diencephalon and cerebellum. It's occupied, it's coupled to a telencephalon which is 30 million years old. Approximately 2 million years ago, the brain capacity of our ancient forebears began greatly increasing, eventually culminating the brain that today is 3 times larger than that of chimpanzee, our closest evolutionary. Related to body mass, the brain volume tends to increase gradually over time, a process from which the human has benefited more significantly than any others. One way understanding the evolution of human brain is to see it as additional higher and higher level of controls. These properties of human brain lead to a prediction regarding the life that will follow man. As nature built the new brain on the top of the old in the ancestors, so too in the next stage of the evolution after man, we can expect that still newer and greater brain will join the old cerebral cortex and work together in concert. You see, the evolution is coming on, new brain is coming on. Just the further we are expecting, if this evolution continues like this, and they will work in concert with the old cerebral cortex to work together. And this will direct our behavior to further life. So possibly, like today we look at the ancient mammals or animals, maybe something like that in future when the newer evolution comes up. In this context, I just want to draw your attention to the brain of the great Einstein. His brain contained 73% more glial cells, but the parietal region was 15% wider than the common average human being. This probably would have given Einstein some powerful visualization skill, given that the regions of the brain are largely responsible for the visuospatial, cognitive, mathematical thoughts and imagery movements. Embryologically, when a human baby grows, he repeats this entire 1 billion years of life. So in Sanskrit they say, Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janani Jatve Sayanam. So this holds good in this context. These are the images I am just trying to see how neurosurgery or medical science slowly evolved with various surgery or our understanding of anatomy. That was the imaging pattern going on. Today we are talking of the precision imaging, and this is the kind of pictures that his patient says that his neurosurgeon has taken. And that is the image that we have. And that's about neurosurgery. That is the current status and our neurologicals, the armchair intellectuals. Friends, neuroscience has advanced so much, and so today we have branching, we have various, I cannot enumerate that how many subdivisions we can have. So these are the various subdivisions now we are practicing. I'll try to give you some idea about the current potentials and the research that's going on. Particularly focus on these are the area that is neuroimaging, how the anatomy is linked. So this morning you saw the pictures, how precision pictures are important to do any tests. The field of neuroimaging is the most important, and it has advanced so much that the treatment is lagging behind. In a sense, every measurement that you make in neuroscience, electrophysiological, optical, gene expression and so on is imaging at a very microscopic level. Techniques like 2-photon microscopy, which allows extreme detailed examination of the structures and processes that's going on within the cells. I like to call your attention to the fluorescent resonance energy transfer, which really allowed us to start imaging processes in the cells as they occur. These techniques give us the ability to look in on the intact functioning of the human brain, in some cases in a very non-invasive way. Consequently, modern imaging views neurosciences in the cell system as a whole. So with this kind of tech, morning you saw tensor imaging, how we can see the tracks. So with this facility, the anatomy and physiology has been integrated, and we can understand actually how the brain is functioning. We don't have to go back and do a staining and cut the dead cells and recalculate what has happened. We have the brain stimulation, morning we're talking, and they are going to have the magnetic MEG in Delhi soon. So the potentiality of the stimulation will be basically they can manipulate the genes, and neural transplantation will be helped beside the other facilities. Today we have neuroendoscopy. We can put the endoscope and monitor the function, single neuron study function for 7 days, 10 days like you see in the endoscope. And then we have this smart pharmacology. Instead of giving a generalized drug, say you give opiates, specific receptors, how they are working, how this particular drug is going, we can see. The genetic and protein sequencing technique, we can just manufacture molecules which can work specifically. We don't have to give a generalized medicine for getting the treatment, so that is our side effects or untoward effects. Morning we are seeing the effect of the injection of phenytoin in the picture. Probably these things will not be there in future anymore. And the Human Genome Project, the 3 billion meter long human genome study, that's probably the greatest endeavor that we had this last century. We have studied it, and that's going to help us in our study. We have the neuroinfrared, now computer age. With these computers age, every part of our life, every aspect of our life is being affected. Time has come now, even your clothing, your dress, everywhere the computer chips will be there, and they will carry the information. So there will be worldwide connection, and at every part, everybody, it's called worldwide consciousness is going to grow. Then comes your neuroengineering, and with neuroengineering will come artificial intelligence. Michael Cohort, he writes about the book about the collective consciousness or the worldwide mind. The computer science will advance so much with the addition of nanotechnology. They are going to interconnect everybody. So there will be a question of reading somebody's thought, somebody's mind. It's is going to happen. But despite all this advancement, despite the fact that the human brain has got a capacity of say 2.5 terabytes, which is equal, we can compare in the sense you run a TV camera continuously for 300 years. That is the capacity of human brain. So with that amount of capacity, everybody is capable of learning. Morning we saw a picture where half of the brain has been taken out, yet the child was bilingual or trilingual, he continued. So whatever we have mapped the brain may not be true. Possibly there's many more things to learn. As time comes, we will be learning that. This is what is going to happen with the evolution of medical science, the knowledge, the basic science research, and the addition of the computer science. What is I am trying, all these things, and human being has been making all attempts to achieve this perfection through some precision mechanisms. I was talking about the artificial intelligence. It's not coming. Projection. Okay. We are talking about the artificial intelligence. We can have computers which will exceed the human knowledge and the amount of capacity that the man is putting, despite that we have 2.5 terabytes of memory capacity. But the thing is, the success of the brain cannot be measured by the ability to process information in precisely repeated ways, what a computer does. Instead, it has evolved to guide the behaviors that allow us to survive and reproduce. We have evolved over well-nigh countless years into distinct species. We encode within our genomic history and development not just increasing intelligence, but other higher attributes like the consciousness, that is self-awareness, love, compassion, charity, justice, attributes peculiar to our species. We will continue to change and evolve for the evolution. For evolution is the makers of life. If we go by what has already transpired and tread in the same evolutionary path, we should evolve perhaps to better human beings together in the future. Advanced in this picture, because with the industrialization, more and more people, that is one aspect we are going to advance in the years to come. Then of course the various implants, particularly the degenerative diseases as well as the neuronal damages. The aim will be to repair those things as well as having the implants or the like the visual implant, the cochlear implant or brain stimulation. We are going to have these prosthetics which are going to enhance the human faculty. This is one aspect which I want to tell. This science has always advanced with the help of the military needs. Most people who have benefited were the physicists and the chemists. Recently, the biologists also. And amongst the biologists, the neuroscientists, where the people, the countries having military interest, they put efforts to go for research in these fields. What's happening actually? One is, I was telling you, this biological warfare. After this attack on the World Trade Center, many of the countries, particularly Europe as well as the United States, have declared war against terror. Besides this terrorism, we have this bioterrorist. And if you look at that, they use the nerve gases. In this Japan, that Soviet thing with the 1995. Earlier to that, in 1960s and 70s, the CIA, they used LSD to stimulate their pilots' fatigability. Now, the research that's going on by the military people came into limelight when a Moscow theater event where they used the opiate-like gas, phentamine, where several people were killed. These things also said to be used in the recent attacks by the Israelis on the Gaza. So this interest will be further augmented with the recent development in neuroscience, particularly this transcranial stimulation. Staying at a remote place, you can control the activities of the pilots, you can give them directions, you can disorient the activities of the enemies, and this is where the neuroscientists are playing a major role at the present moment, and in future this may be a issue for the ethical concern. I'll come to the ethical and legal aspects that neuroscience, because neuroscience has been affecting each aspect of our life. According to the mind reading, somebody can read somebody's thought, and we have having the cognitive enhancement facilities. How this is going to affect our life in the social sphere or ethical sphere. I give an example. Researchers had implanted the electrodes inside the brain with some of the patients who had depression, and with the therapy, with the stimulation, they were cured. However, these patients fell in love with the investigators. So this is one of the things. After that, this aspect of research was stopped. So this is basically a threat, because this affects the human dignity and the autonomy. This is more dangerous than what can going to happen in cloning. Human behavior somehow or other is modified or modulated or affected by the genetic makeup. But then when you modify the genetics makeup, it is finally through the neurogenome that one is going to do it. So ultimately, the neuroscientists who are going to be affected, who are going to do this. We have also now techniques which is going to develop and already coming up, but particularly by the neuroimaging system, where he can read the mind of a person. If he can, before he thinks, before that he executes the thing, one can read. In such a thing, in the court of law, somebody may say, this is not my brain, I did not do it, the brain did it. We have now methods to detect lying. We have methods to predict who is a criminal, who is going to be violent, though we don't have legislation to take somebody into action in anticipation, but these technologies are already available. Even brain fingerprinting technology is already available. If you go into the website, you will see that you can print a person who is a good person, a bad person. This can be differentiated, and the innocence of a person can be proved. So this is going into the legal field of somebody's in our society in future. Having seen that, like you have seen the Nazi German, the eugenics, people might utilize this neuroscientific knowledge to select people. So that is going to affect our society very badly and in a very negative way. This stem cell research is one thing which is going to be effective in this direction. Then the free will of a person. As I told you, we have methods to detect somebody's thought, what somebody is planning to do before he executes it. So you are getting into somebody's private life. So in a neurocentric world, this is going to be affected greatly. What do the futurists say about this? This Kurzweil, he is the man who is supposed to be the machine who tells the future, and his book has been translated into 9 languages. What I tell, our knowledge, scientific revolution is going to grow exponentially, and now it is growing in such a way, it is going to be hyper exponential in course of time. And what it will lead to? When the explosion is so much, a stage will come that it will lead to singularity. That is a stage where this is the point where the current trends may go wildly off the chart, and this is known as the singularity. So we cannot possibly envision what is going to happen after this. future in medical science and neuroscience, there will be overlapping of the genetic, nanotechnology and robotic technology. In nanotechnology, our medicines are going to be nanomedicines, where the molecules, these nanomolecules will be about 7 microns, will be half the size of the neurons. They can get inside the cell. Even they can be put non-invasively. So every aspect of life, everything can be or possibly going to change in the future by the combination of these various techniques, particularly genetics, nanotechnology, that is nanoengineering, and the robotics. These are the symbol of immortality in various culture. So with all these facilities and development going to happen, can somebody be immortal? Yes. What we have thought in the past, possibly going to happen. We have ways. We can change our organs. Either you have a bio organ or you can have a mechanical organ. We have neural implants to keep ourselves alive. We may not be there, but our brain will be there. We have bloods, RBCs, so nanotechnology. They can feed us oxygen. Even now it is available. 15 minutes we can be there underwater without need for oxygen. As I told you, nanotechnology which is going to affect in every aspect of our medical science. Then this is cyber self-explanatory. We will be replacing part of our body, as I said, not necessarily biological. We can have mechanical part, partly biological and partly mechanical, and then we live on. If all these things doesn't happen, still we have means. We can go for the vitrification and cryopreservation and wait till the technology advances. There are already 200 bodies are being saved like this, and we will rise from death in future. I watched a movie recently. Those who have seen this movie, even if you live forever, are you really sure you would want to? Because in this movie, the human beings are coming and begging for death. So the technological advancement, we neurologists, neurosurgeons, neuroanesthesists, neuropathologists, we cannot work individually. We have to join hands, not only with the medical basic neuroscientists, also with our colleagues who are in other fields of that, the engineers, the people who are in the computer science, and then only we can progress our science. There may not be doctors, certainly engineer. Yesterday Dr. Misra was telling that neurosurgery is nothing but engineering. Probably you saw a picture, Dr. Fujita, with whom I worked in Japan. Till the age of 46, he was an engineer. Then I saw him designing his aneurysm clips on the table and clipping the aneurysm. So possibly they make better surgeons than the people who have got medical MBBS training, and we have, I won't say we have wasted our time, maybe we have spent more time in learning basic things than the technology what we need. So friends, I can tell you that we need a balanced life. Otherwise, this story of Daedalus and Icarus, we must not fly very high because the sun might melt the wings, or if you fly very low, the wings may get wet by the water. So one has to make a balance somewhere and plod through and tread through in this existing society. So in conclusion, the future of the man and neuroscience rests with us. We should not be blinded by the dazzling light of science, nor bewitched by its power and beauty, so as to have been to it. We should channelize it for the benefit of mankind. Human being is distinctly unique. The evolutionary history of man stretches back to million and million years. I have repeated this. Man has not ceased to evolve. He will continue to do so, perhaps indefinitely, through the corridors of time, unless he destroys himself or is destroyed during the passage. Man possesses the neuronal compass, which has and can guide him to his intellectual destiny. We are going to be totally demystifying the religious beliefs of natural state of higher consciousness into a total science in future. The most rewarding thing we can do now is to help create a better tomorrow free of neurological diseases. The future will be close to heaven. Then I believe the journey of the neuroscientist will be a successful one. Thank you very much for listening, and I must thank to those authors whose work I have plagiarized, because I have just plucked some flowers and made a garland to present to all of you. Thank you.
Now, I request the Anicon Society to present the memento to the President of ANI, Dr. G.K. Prusty. Chairpersons Dr. Sanathan Rasa and Dr. N. Upadhyay are requested to present the memento to Dr. G.K. Prusty.
I request our chairpersons to present the memento to our President Dr. G.K. Prusty. There's another memento to be presented. Now I request Dr. Sanjeev Mishra sir to present the memento to our honorable chairpersons. So now we come to the end of the session. Now we'll have the